Hi, and welcome to New Hampshire Politics with John Burt. I'm your host today, Representative Bart Fromuth from Bedford. Representative Burt, unfortunately, is on sick leave right now. He'll be back hopefully next week, but in the meantime, he's given us the keys to the castle, and we will do as we may. So I'm joined today by Representatives Ammon and Osborne, coming at you from New Boston and Auburn. So, gentlemen, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Start with Mr. Ammon.
Okay, do I talk to the camera? Hello, folks at home. My name is Keith Ammon. I live in the next town over in New Boston. A little bit about myself. I served on the New Boston School Board. We have an SAU where we share middle and high school with Goffstown. So right now we're taping in the Goffstown High School, and I've spent many an evening here on different school boards and different boards. So we're neighbors. And I'm also a state representative from New Boston. It's my first term. And I'm actually in a floterial district, which is leftovers from several towns put together. And the towns are New Boston, Mount Vernon, Milford, and Hollis. So it goes all the way down to Hollis.
And you're on municipal
and county government committee.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's 20 committees in the State House, so approximately 20 members each. And municipal counties, the one I'm on.
Excellent, excellent. And Representative Osborne.
Hey, I'm from Auburn. I'm on the Education Committee. This is my first time in the State House, still getting used to things and figuring out how things work.
Awesome, awesome. Well, actually, all three of us are first termers. Met up at the State House and became fast friends, and obviously somewhat like-minded, or very much like-minded, I think, in our thought process.
There's a little bit of Three Musketeers dynamic going on.
So debate might be a little lacking in terms of disagreement tonight, but bear with us. We're with you for the full hour, and John's got some pretty big shoes to fill, but hopefully we can keep you entertained for a portion of the segment. But again, don't be alarmed. He'll be back next week, and anybody out there that is a regular follower, and I know there's lots, he'll be back. So without further ado, let's jump into business up at the Capitol. So if you've been following the press lately, the nipple bill has gotten a lot of attention. Representative Baldessaro, Representative Moore, and Representative Bolden have had a little bit of a national kind of food fight, if you will, over whether or not women should be allowed to expose their nipples on a number of beaches here in New Hampshire. Actually, I shouldn't say a number of beaches. We only get 18 miles of coastline, but that's a hot topic lately. Give me your thoughts in terms of where you stand.
Well, I know all three, at least acquaintance level. It's not the most important issue going on in the state, but it did kind of light this flame war that traveled, I think, even over to Great Britain. I think papers picked it up over there. And I think it was a late night conversation on Facebook. Maybe I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it was a Facebook conversation. Amanda called out one of the prime sponsors, which was Josh Moore.
Right.
And it turned into a back and forth. And there were some comments made and deleted that may not have been the most appropriate comments, and it got to the national media and just kind of blew up from there. So
that's why you never Facebook in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And particularly not when you've been drinking.
All right. Well, anybody out there aspiring to be a state rep, about 5 million of us. Those are wise words from Representative Osborne. I mean, the comments. I agree. I mean, some of the comments that were thrown around late at night. Probably not things that I would utilize, but one thing that struck me is interesting is how something like this getting blown up in the universe of national media can really I don't if retard is the right word or kind of change perception in terms of how the relationship between Representative Bolden and Representative Moore and Baldessaro actually plays out on a daily basis. Bolden and Baldessaro sit right next to each other and actually have a pretty good relationship. Now, I think this has stoked a little bit of a pause in that friendly and cordial relationship, but they actually get along quite well, as does Rep Moore with Rep Bolden, and but it makes it seem, I think, that there's a lot more contentious behavior between reps.
Particularly when people repeat the statements in a context that was completely not intended in its original form.
Right.
Like, like Baldessaro didn't mean anything by what he said, but they're painting it out to be, oh, he's so offensive toward Representative Bolden.
You know, I see how, you know, Amanda could take issue with what Al said, but you know, now she's got a lot of people, I think, fighting a battle for her that she doesn't really necessarily want. I mean, they can handle that.
Well, you know, in a couple weeks it'll all blow over.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not you know, it's not an issue that's going to be around very long. And the three of them, two are Republicans. Amanda is a Democrat.
Right.
But they're fairly like-minded. Their voting pattern is fairly similar.
Yeah.
And you know, they're friends with people that we know. You know, they're part of a larger circle. And I really hope it doesn't cause division, because people that are like-minded, you know, we're all small government guys here.
Right.
People that are like-minded, we need to work together. And these little petty squabbles and you know, personality conflicts, it's not worth wasting any time or energy on it, because there's so many more important issues that we need to be dealing with as state reps. I mean, we're going up there to make an impact and have a difference, and
right.
fighting over these silly little things, it's not. No, I hope we can rise above it. You know, all of us.
How many phone calls have you gotten? People asking you, "Hey, what can we do to get rid of Representative so-and-so and the Representative so-and-so for these things that they said?" Like, what are you talking about? They vote the right way all the time.
Yeah.
No, and again, I mean, all three probably vote 80% similar to one another, despite being in different parties. You know, Al's made the news a few times for a couple choice comments in a couple different situations.
I think he might revel in it a little bit.
A little bit. You know, I think he's a Trump supporter.
Well, there you go. That just explains it right there.
And I think that goes to the non-apologetic way that he conducts himself. I'm probably, you know, much better friends with Representative Bolden than I am with Representative Baldessaro, but at the same time, we all kind of run in a similar grouping at the State House. You know, so and you know, I think if everybody, all three, could take back the whole situation, they probably would, in terms of a public conversation. That's why we have secret chat groups between us, you know, rather than the public stuff. But
or your private chat groups,
right.
Yeah, I wonder if people at home, if they've never heard of this controversy. I find it sort of funny, because I know the people involved, and I know, like, there's people they're digging each other, but they're not really angry about it. You know.
Well, I mean, I follow both Bolden and Baldessaro on Twitter. And,
Okay.
And you know, the battles that they're going back and forth, you know, are entertaining.
Right.
But I do. I mean, we're not even really getting to the heart of the issue, which is the bill itself. Which, speaking for myself, I wouldn't vote for that bill simply because you know, right now the law of the land is, you know, bear it all. Correct, and we're trying to, I guess, designate towns to have the authority to restrict.
But that's the problem. Our children are growing up in a world where nipples are just going down the street all day long. Oh wait, they're not. It's not. But how is it not happening when we don't have a law to prevent it?
Well, you know, it beats the heck out of me. I disagree with the foundation behind the arguments behind why Baldessaro and Moore and everybody else brought this bill. I agree with Amanda Bolden's statement that, you know, here in 2016, we're passing a bill with the subject line, you know, basically sort of started the first sentence saying that women cannot.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the basic principles of writing good legislation, is that the law needs to apply to everyone equally. You know, we're all individuals, and we all are equal, and so therefore the language of the law should apply to everyone equally. And so if it applies to just one gender or one group of people, that should be a red flag to anyone reading it, that it's not a fair law. So we shouldn't be writing laws that only apply to a certain subgroup of the population.
Absolutely. So you know, I think we've got nipples covered for today, but it did come up at the State House today. I unfortunately was not present, but the two of you were.
Yeah, well, they tried to divide the question and take the bill and kind of.
Yeah, I still don't understand what it means.
Yeah,
but it sounded like they were trying to just throw the bill away and not address it.
So this is how it works in terms of when a few people want to take over your government and control what we do. They actually don't let your representatives take an actual vote or a position on something,
or even understand what's going on,
or even understand. But it failed. It failed, fortunately. So it'll. there's some motion to, I think it's divide the question. I don't know. It's something that never happens.
Well, yeah, for the viewers at home,
Yeah.
so the bill itself wasn't actually being voted on today. What was taking place was the fact that the bill is now going through the committee phase.
It's
it has
supposed
to be
right. It's
introduced
supposed
to
to.
committee for hearings, testimony, so on and so forth. Committee then takes a position on the bill, makes recommendation to the floor of the House, and at that point in time, we get to vote on the bill. But essentially what they tried to do today was to rip it up and make believe that it had never been submitted,
Right.
it never happened. And although I don't want the bill to pass, this is a problem, I think, when leadership flexes a muscle
It is.
that speaks one person or a few people for all 400, which are supposed to represent 1.3 million.
It's a major issue with lack of transparency, and if we allow these little shortcuts and corner roundings to happen, that eventually it'll undermine the integrity of the system. And
Absolutely. Similar to when a Speaker of the House deletes a minority blurb that was well written by a certain representative from Bedford.
I thought it was pretty well. I had it in my pocket.
And it's a joke about what happened today. Again, the Speaker being embroiled in a second controversy involving a minority blurb that I had written on a Senate Bill 110, which is the Administrative Supervision Act, which gives the Division of Insurance the ability to take over a private insurance company.
Right.
Now, obviously, being a smaller government Republican, I really have no use for government control.
It's like what banana republics do with coal companies. Like the government takes over the coal company and tries to run it, and it's even worse with this bill. It allowed it to happen in secret, that no one could even know the government was taking over the insurance company. Unfortunately, this bill passed, and I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah.
No.
I'll slow down.
With flying colors. it
Fix
passed.
my fix my.
Yeah, good times.
So but you touch on something that's really important, and this bill had written into it a circumvention of 91A, which is our right to know laws. This is basically keep your voters and your citizens informed, and yet the Division of Insurance, who wrote the bill, because I'm on the committee and they presented it to us as theirs, circumvented 91A so that once they've taken over a company, you as a citizen don't know, because we won't tell you. We'll tell you everything's hunky-dory actually with the company.
Well, not only that, but the people from the company it's felonious for them to say anything about it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And they couldn't, if there was a dispute and they wanted to take it to court, they couldn't use anything as evidence unless the insurance commissioner said it was okay.
Well, that
crazy.
takes me into the standard. So when this bill first got before the Commerce Committee, it had total immunity for any members of the insurance department, regardless of what happened to the company after they took it over.
Right.
So that means that basically the commissioner of insurance could buy himself a small island out in the Barbados area, perhaps. And there was nothing you could do about it because he had total immunity. He could run the company into the ground with the shareholder and customer money, and there was nothing anybody could do.
Would the shareholders even have known that the company
No,
was?
nobody can
no
know.
one
Not
can
even
know.
the shareholders.
Under this law.
But especially the shareholders, because they don't want everyone just dumping
The stock.
So, I raised holy hell in committee about this full immunity provision and was able to get a majority of the committee to agree that blanket immunity was probably not appropriate.
Right.
So they were benevolent enough to give me wanton and reckless, which basically, in legal terms, means you have to prove that the state employee that takes over the company wanted it to fail. So good luck to you in court. So if they're just negligent and don't know what they're doing controlling a $100 million insurance company, too bad.
But they're in the Department of Insurance. They should know how to run an insurance company, right?
Well, funny you should say that, because most of the commissioners of the Department of Insurance are actually political appointees that have no experience whatsoever.
You know how they talk about crony capitalism, and this is where like a company will sidle up to the government, get special favors from the government. That's the crony part.
Yeah.
Well, in the State House, we have it's a cronyism, but it's between the departments and the legislature. So it's cronyism within government, where they'll allow the department to write its own legislation, and then leadership will just clear the path for that legislation to get passed. I don't understand it. I don't understand why there isn't more pushback between the legislature, which represents the people, and these different departments that are operating at the state level.
It's interesting to think about, because that absolutely happens in terms of when these agencies present these bills. They come before our committees and they say, well, geez, we'd really like to have this power. So they put it before the committee. And there is a significant group of representatives, I think, that have in my humble opinion, a misunderstanding of their role in Concord. Their role is not to do the bidding of the agencies. The agency's role is to do the bidding of the people.
Right.
And over the years, we've got this situation where a lot of reps look to the agencies for their institutional knowledge and their experience. And, oh, geez, I've only been here for a couple terms. I don't know anything about the subject matter that you presented me with. So, sure, if the Liquor Commission says I should pass this 10-page bill, well, they know best. If the banking department says I should pass a 150-page bill, I read it, but I don't really understand it, so have your way with it.
Right.
That happens a lot more often than people
and
think.
There's this phenomenon in government. The short acronym for it is FUMU, F-U-M-U, and I won't tell you what F stands for, but the F-U-M-U, F up, move up. Okay, so that's the phenomenon in government where when they fail, the response is they need more money and more personnel. So it's a cycle of not meeting their responsibilities and then requesting from the legislature more money and more manpower. And that cycle just keeps continuing. And a department's kind of like an organism. It wants to grow. The middle manager wants more people under them. They want more plow trucks. They want more infrastructure. And those departments just keep growing and growing all throughout the state. And it's the legislature's job to put the brakes on that and not to just allow it to grow without any kind of pushback on it. So that's my feeling anyway.
What are your
Reminds
thoughts?
me of a bill that we passed today following that principle. It came out of my committee, wherein we will be paying schools extra money for every child in their school that doesn't meet mathematics proficiency. So you screw up your job of teaching math, we will pay you for that service. Thank you very much.
That's FUMU. That's FUMU right there.
And that passed with flying colors today.
Excellent, excellent. It's nice to know that we're doing some tremendous things up there.
But with regard to the insurance bill and cronyism, it was mentioned today by the proponents of the bill that the insurance companies were actually in favor of it.
It's not true, but...
Okay, so that's just blatant lie.
I actually...
So are you saying someone else besides you was a liar with regard to this bill?
It's not in the permanent journal because the speaker wouldn't allow it. And the speaker, I wasn't there again today, but the speaker apparently called me an untruth teller on the House floor today. But I will tell you that I spoke to numerous insurance companies, and I was told by them, we did not ask for this bill. They came to us, said, we would like to have this power. What can we get from you so that you won't oppose it? And I've been in this situation. I'm in the energy industry myself. I know how the regulators are. When they come and they ask for something,
they're not asking.
They're not really asking.
No.
And when they say, what would you like? They're basically saying, like, what little snippet can we give you so that, you won't make us, stay till 5:30.
How far will you bend over?
Exactly. And so what the insurance companies came back with was to say, well, if you put a provision in there that says that you have to have our permission before you can do this, then we will not testify against the bill. But keep in mind, not testifying against the bill is different than supporting it or asking for it. There was no support amongst the insurance companies. And when I say, oh, well, we only took them over because they asked for it. Well, the alternative under the rules and regulations is if you don't give us administrative supervision, we're just going to close you down.
Right.
So that's the equivalent of a gun to your head if you're in business.
Move, yeah.
How is that different than mafioso tactics?
Right. So for anyone at home, I don't know if we're too much into the weeds. If you're familiar with the GenCourt website, it's gencourt.state.nh.us.
I was just Google NH GenCourt.
But you're able to look up the language of the bill if you're interested, and you can see the provisions that we're talking about. And it's SB 110.
SB 110
from 2015.
Yep.
But our reading of it is that it gave the government way too much power. One of the things they said from the floor today was that, it's model legislation, 30 other states have passed it. I don't know whether that's how accurate that is or not, but
They also said the insurance department is already doing this.
Yeah, they did say that.
Which
is
and
scary.
again, I'm an attorney, and if this was a court of law, I would use that as evidence that maybe the insurance department is breaking the law. If it's using a power that has not already been granted to them, that sounds crazy.
It does sound crazy.
But they said this on the floor of the House,
Yeah.
which, by the way, anything said from the floor of the House is immune from use at any court, actually.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. So, but it's just funny to me. It's like, oh, we're already doing this. You know, give us the power.
That's what they said. These are just the ground rules for something that we're already doing. Like, it sounds it sounds crazy.
So, I mean, if you sense a little frustration, and again, you guys have been watching the John Burt show for a while, so I'm sure you're familiar with gripes and moans about the way government works. But so this was one that was near and dear to my heart today because my former best friend, Sean Jasper, said some mean things about me today. Sean, if you're listening, you're not invited to next year's Christmas party. So, moving on. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sure he's not a bad guy.
Yeah. No, he just needs a hug.
Yeah.
He needs a big hug. If you're listening out there, Sean, I will give you a hug at any point in time that you'd like to make amends over what's happened. So, and I'd like to walk him through the bill and show him how I didn't lie. But anyway, I want to move on to the president's executive actions on gun control.
Interesting.
Now, admittedly, viewers out there in John Burt land, I have not read through the executive order yet. I know it hasn't been signed yet. So there's basically like a rough draft, I think, of what they're working on. That's
several executive actions
kind of rolled into one.
Yeah, I don't know. If
and executive actions for folks that are at home. This is a way for the president on high, Republican or Democrat, they're both guilty of the same stuff. If I can't get it through Congress, I'm just going to sign a piece of paper and make it so. That doesn't seem like democracy.
That's not what it's supposed to be, though. It's supposed to be how he does his job, by telling his people what to do.
Right.
Well, right.
It's orders for the executive branch internally, not
well,
to
that's
make
the way
laws.
it's supposed to be.
He's not supposed to be telling them to do things that they're not authorized to do.
In other words, what Representative Osborne is saying is that you cannot create laws from the executive office.
Right.
They'd be similar to Governor Hassan kind of picking out whatever her favorite legislation might be, and then just issuing orders on that.
I like the governor of Texas' response in a tweet. He said, "Come and take it," and I thought that was. I wish we had a governor that, that would stand up to the feds a little more. I really do.
Well, it's a sad practice. And again, I'll be one of the first to go ahead and call out my own party when they're in the wrong. George W. Bush, prior to Obama, had the most executive actions prior to him. Now Obama is setting a new record, and who can basically take over the government the most. And I can't wait for the next president.
It's just going to keep accumulating more and more power to the executive branch.
And the problem is that Congress here is just watching their job being done for them, essentially, by the executive office. And they don't have the stone, so to speak, to go on, take on this president or the next president. And they're ceding power because they do have the authority to go ahead and bring actions against the president. They could sue him before the Supreme Court. But you're just not seeing an aggressive, other than tweets and press releases.
Yeah. Well, they have the power of the purse, and they're too afraid to use it. They don't want to shut the government down. And everyone knows. You guys know what the Washington Monument tactic is. So if you're on a local committee in town, let's say you're running the fire department, or this could apply to local government and federal government. At the federal government level, I think it was during the Nixon administration, they cut way back on federal funds, and the National Park Service, the first thing they did was to shut down the Washington Monument. And you'll see this happen over and over again. Like a city will shut down the swimming pools and the libraries. They'll shut down the things that taxpayers see the most
value.
Yeah, they want to cause the most
return on investment
and disruption to the taxpayers, so the taxpayers complain like, "Hey, open the government back up." So you remember there was a showdown maybe 18 months ago in the federal government. And they put those little gates up in front of the Vietnam Memorial or the World War II Memorial, where it was open anyway, But for some reason, because the government was shut down, they had to erect barriers so you couldn't go look at the walls.
So they had to. Well, I remember
People's
that.
name on it.
And anybody that's been to the Washington Monument, it's all open. There's no fencing around it.
Yeah.
So they actually had to go and pay someone to put fencing up to denote that it was shut down.
Well, so that's one of the tactics that's one of the reasons why the Republicans are afraid to use the power of the purse and to shut the government down, is because when they do that, then all the different departments, the federal agencies, they try to cause the most pain by shutting down the most visible, useful aspects of the government so that the taxpayers get upset.
Right.
And you'll see that happen in towns. Like this is an obvious tactic if you're on the inside, but from the outside, you might not realize that, that a local government is using that tactic. So, Washington Monument Syndrome, I think there's a Wikipedia page you can read about it.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I remember, again, the park services all being shut down the last time the government had a hiccup, and they'd interview the park ranger who hadn't worked in a week, and some people standing at the gate, like, oh, I just traveled here from Delaware, I'm out in Wyoming, and why can't I get in?
Yeah, it's some crazy stuff. But it speaks to, like, Congress is
there's no question
they're not standing up to the
there's no
executive
question
branch.
that Congress is. I mean, there's a reason that their approval ratings are so damn low. It's just because these people are inept. Some of our own Congress people are inept. I'm not afraid to say that. It's true. I mean, they whether you're on the Republican side or the Democrat side, there's very few that they actually campaign for that you see results once they get to the to DC. One thing that obviously I'm aggrieved, I'm sure you guys are as well, is all the Republicans that pander to the folks that really want to reduce spending and reduce the size of government, and then they get there and they sign omnibus. They sign up for omnibus spending bills that go far beyond the bounds of anything we've seen before. So there's a frustration on both sides of the aisle. In my opinion, that's led to the rise of a Bernie Sanders on the left and a Donald Trump on the right, because they're seen as kind of outside the mainstream political workings. But it'll be interesting to see how these elections play out, because I do see a powder keg kind of mentality developing.
There's also this long-term trend where, at the federal level, the more power that the federal that gets aggregated and accumulated at the federal level, like through different departments, the Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of, whatever the agency is, all this power gets accumulated at the federal level, and then people fight over that power, right? Like, you're only going to see the federal politics at the federal level, you're only going to see it get more and more divisive as the power gets more and more accumulated at the federal level. See what I mean?
Yep, no, absolutely.
So it's kind of, because there's so much at stake. Like, if you have the reins of power at the federal level, there's so much at stake because it controls so many aspects of our lives. It didn't used to be that way. The state level. I'm a Rand Paul fan. I don't know if you guys like Rand Paul, but I think he's pretty cool.
I've been many times in the show that I'm a
okay, good. But
deep Rand Paul supporter.
He's been having these, like, town hall meetings that they've been streaming live on Facebook. You can sign up and you'll get an alert, and you can watch him be in Exeter or Laconia or wherever he is. And I was watching him yesterday. I think he was in Exeter yesterday. But he made this point that it used to be the federal government was so small that it was actually a prestigious thing to be part of the state legislature. That was where the power was, because each state had its capital and its seat, and the federal government was very tiny. So it was prestigious to be a state legislator. And thinking about that statement now is kind of funny. It's we're kind of little at the state level. We're peons compared to the power of the federal government.
Yeah, I would concur with that. Yeah,
it was an interesting statement that Rand made.
That'll bring us to the midpoint here. We'll be back in a few minutes to take you through the second half of the show. Thank you for tuning in. All right, welcome back. Once again, this is New Hampshire Politics with John Burt. I am Bart Fromuth. I'm the guest host tonight. I'm joined with Representative Ammon, Representative Osborne. We've been talking about the State House. We've been talking about nibbles, gun control, executive actions, and second half we're going to delve into New Hampshire's heroin crisis and the task force that is currently taking place up at the State House, and some of the either well thought out or ill-conceived ideas that they may have presented over the last few months. So without further ado, let's start off with Representative Ammon and dive right in. What are your thoughts in terms of the state's ability to solve something like this in the first place?
It's a good question. I wasn't around, I wasn't alive at the time, but back in the early 1900s, we had alcohol prohibition. And I don't understand how people don't see the correlates between prohibiting alcohol and prohibiting other mind-altering substances. Back then, they amended the Constitution to prohibit alcohol. It seems counterintuitive, and it might be a generational thing. It might be, the younger demographic might see this point more easily than the older demographic. But it seems like the prohibition has a worse effect than the substances themselves. And when someone wants to alter their consciousness, like little kids do it, they spin around or they go on a merry-go-round, right? They're mixing up their senses, and somehow that's an entertaining thing. But with mind-altering substances like alcohol or heroin or other drugs, it's sort of that vertigo effect that to some degree is entertaining, but it's also an escape. It's escapism from your actual life and the problems in your life. And so I see drug addiction, you could almost call it a spiritual problem, like someone with a religious bent might think of it in terms of a crisis of a person's spirituality, and they're turning to these substances to kind of fill some kind of void. This is, I'm using my imagination a little bit, but I think this might be, I've never been a heroin addict and hit rock bottom, but I'd imagine someone who goes through that cycle. It's a problem where we need to help rehabilitate people. They need to be in a caring environment. They need to, have tools where they can work through their issues and their problems, where they don't have to resort to these substances. And when you use prohibition is, back in the alcohol prohibition, it was, the cops would show up and they'd smash all the barrels and take some pictures, and people would go to jail. It's a heavy-handed approach for something that seems to be more of a crisis of.
Like maybe even using the term health, like it's a health problem, not a crime problem. Would that be fair?
I think so, because what happens is when you drive an industry underground, okay, and you make an industry illegal. Let's keep it. We'll keep talking about alcohol. You drive an alcohol industry underground, and the only way that people can settle disputes in that industry at that point, because it's not legal, is through intimidation, threats, and violence. They can't take their competition to the court and resolve a dispute that way. You also have a problem with quality control. There's no quality control in a black market industry. You don't know what, people could mix things together and call it something.
Is that what, like the whole fentanyl or whatever it's called, or they're introducing into the heroin, I guess, which is causing
they cut it with things, and there's no, so when you drive an industry underground, there's all these adverse consequences. And I don't know why our country didn't learn that during alcohol prohibition. I mean, bathtub gin only existed because you could make it faster. It was had higher potency, so you could, you could transport it in smaller containers. And drugs like meth or synthetic marijuana or all these other things, there's some drugs that may not have existed in the first place if prohibition wasn't there. So well, that's my view.
To play devil's advocate, what would you say to folks that are worried if we, legalize heroin access? That we would, in a way, the government would be endorsing use of this damaging drug. What's your response to folks that are worried that it will actually get more people potentially hooked on heroin?
I'm sorry.
Well, you can look at the evidence of what has happened in other countries where they've done it, such as Portugal, where you had a very brief spike, like you just described, in drug use, but then it petered out. And now it's much less than it was before the Prohibition, and without all of the problems of the black market in terms of the safety and quality control and violence in the streets.
I mean, it's funny you mention like safety control and like what are the active ingredients and what we're presenting to you. Now, obviously, heroin by itself can be damaging, but what we see is it gets chopped up with a number of other very, very hazardous substances that, you know, the person buying the drugs in the street has no idea what's in the units that they're buying. I don't know if they describe them as units on the street, but whatever. But you go back to, like, remember moonshine? You'd always hear about, you know, how people could go blind, and, you know, they put turpentine and things of that nature to dilute.
That's an example of how the Prohibition makes the problem worse. You know, like it's counterintuitive. Like, our minds aren't wired that way. But I think if you would examine the evidence, you might come to the same conclusion. You know, putting people in cages isn't going to solve the problem.
Well, that's interesting. So, you know, and I am very, very sympathetic to the ideas behind doing away with some level of prohibition with these substances. Now, when I said advocate for full legalization of heroin, I'm probably not there yet. But one thing I would say I'm firmly there on is this idea that, you know, when these folks use drugs and they're addicts and they're hurting themselves and they're making decisions for themselves, why are we putting them in prison for 10 or 15 years? Why are we giving them felonies so that if that person at one point in time, you know, hopefully gets their situation together, we've eliminated the ability for them to have a fruitful life in many instances. Because even being up at the State House, I know many bills that we passed for a numerous amount of professions. If you have a felony in your record, don't bother getting that license.
Right.
So how is that person supposed to ever recuperate if they've been given assistance by our penal system? Right. I would also mention that the last 3 presidents we have had, Obama, Bush, and Clinton, have all admitted to using some form of illegal drug. Now I ask you this.
Where would they if they had been caught?
Thank you.
I think Bush Jr. did cocaine. You know, I mean, that's a pretty serious drug. I've never done it myself, but in my mind, it's kind of on the same level as heroin.
But because Obama may have done marijuana, Bush may have done cocaine, Clinton also did marijuana, does that mean that they're ruined for forever. Society for the rest of their lives? Right. I can pretty much assure you.
I wouldn't blame the drugs for that,
but I would assure you that had they gone through the penal system, had they been arrested, had they been charged with felonies, that none of those 3 men would ever have become president of the United States. And what does that say about the solutions that we're dealing with right now, that we've had on the books for years? The war on drugs is an abject failure, in my opinion. I think everybody here at this table agrees with that. Right. But then you go and you see some of the folks, and I don't know if you guys stopped by. I know I saw you at some of the task force hearings. I know that you were privy to a lot of what was taking place. But one day that I was up there was when Attorney General Joe Foster was testifying. And his grand idea for how to solve the heroin crisis was to make distribution of the drug, if you're caught, second-degree murder.
Now, equivalent to it?
No, you're charged, not the equivalent. You're charged with second-degree murder. Now, I'm an attorney, and Joe Foster's an attorney, and I can tell you that if you look at the breakdown of what constitutes second-degree murder, you must actually have intent to kill the person that's actually died. Okay, when you're distributing, maybe you're selling a clean strain of heroin. Who knows? But if no one actually dies, how can you be charged with murder? Number one, if you didn't have the intent to kill your users, how can you be charged with second-degree murder? It just seems to me that we're doubling down on broken policies.
On failed policy.
And people like Joe Foster, who've been in this government for a very long period of time, are retreading the same tired ideas, and it's only going to make situations worse.
It goes back to the concept that you introduced at the beginning of the show, the MUFU or Moby or whatever it was. So you screw it up, you double down, you keep doing it. You throw more money, you throw more penalties.
Why not charge them with terrorism while we're at it?
Oh, yeah.
Possession of nuclear arms. I mean, what have you. The point being is that it just seems that like the people that are making the decisions at the top of the food chain are not learning any lessons. I mean,
It's an intractable problem, though. I mean, it's not an easily solvable issue. So,
but
I think they are learning their lesson, right? I mean, they're getting everything that they want. They're getting bigger budgets. They're taking more of our stuff. They're controlling more of our lives. They're taking over more of our businesses.
Crisis breeding more government control.
Yeah, and as long as they keep getting away with it, they're learning that they can continue getting away with it.
I was listening to, I don't know if any of the viewers out there in John Burt world listen to NHPR, but I do on occasion. I like to see what the other side's up to. I was listening to the Laura Kanoy show, and she had on Jeb Bradley and a number of members of our medical society here in New Hampshire. And they were talking about the rise in the heroin epidemic. And this is with State Senator Jeb Bradley, Republican, opinions aside. But they were talking about what gave rise to this issue in New Hampshire and other states that have seen this epidemic take place. And you know what they talked about? They talked about the fact that about 4 or 5 years ago, we passed insanely restrictive opioid laws for painkillers and so on and so forth. So let's say that you have a back problem that you've been dealing with for umpteen years.
Right.
And you take a painkiller to deal with that
to
back
go
problem.
to work or go to sleep or to function normally. Right.
The government then decided, well, we as the government, and very few of us are actually doctors, think that we know better than the medical profession, and we'd like to go ahead and attack what we see at the time is this opioid addiction issue.
Yeah.
And we're going to restrict the amount of opioids that can be dealt to somebody. We're going to make them get mandatory testing to ensure that they've been taking the drugs. And Bradley, who's been a major proponent of this task force and championed some of these terrible ideas, 5 months ago was agreeing that the legislature had a hand in today's heroin crisis by being restrictive on opioids.
Right.
And that's why we see members of every class of society, housewives, valedictorians, people that you wouldn't think would be on heroin are on it because, well, now they can't get their painkillers. So they turn to the streets.
Right.
And here he is admitting this.
Well, that's an example of how prohibition has a counterintuitive effect. Like, it's on the surface, it seems like a good idea to restrict opioids if people are abusing them, but it has this counterintuitive result where it makes the problem worse because it restricts the market. The price of pills go higher and higher. Fewer people get access to them, and as you said, they turn to heroin. It's a cheaper substitute.
The more you tighten your grip, the more they slip through your fingers.
Right.
Well, I mean, when you go to your dealer down the street, he doesn't have a copay. You don't have to go ahead and take a urine test to buy from him, and he's never going to tell you no. And that's essentially.
And he picks up the phone when you call.
Right,
you could get an appointment right away.
But here it is, and this is what makes me pull my hair out. This is what makes me run for office and try to dethrone these people, is the fact that here he is talking about how he's acknowledging prohibition that we put in place earlier with opioids and painkillers created an even worse problem. And rather than having his brain turn to the idea, maybe we should repeal some of those laws we put in place.
Right.
He turns to doubling down. One of the ideas that he was championing and the governor was championing, that now for emergency prescription rules, that you can only get 8-day allotments of painkillers. Not full prescriptions anymore.
That's crazy.
Great.
8-day allotments.
That reminds me of one of the sponsors of that opioid bill from back in the day telling us that, as the sponsor of that bill, I wondered if this would happen.
I'm going to say names because voters need to be informed. That's Jack Flanagan, former majority leader of the Republican Party. Jack Flanagan
whose
said,
latest and greatest great idea is to create a yellow pages of drug dealers. So
talking about the registry.
Registry.
So for folks out in TV land, the registry basically deals with the situation in which if you've been caught dealing, as Representative Osborne calls it, a yellow pages of who to call when I need my fix. But all of a sudden, you can now go and look up who in the past has dealt drugs. And they think that, well, geez, if the 10 or 15 or 20 years we're going to hit them with in jail doesn't work, we're going to put them on a list.
Yeah.
No, and I get that shaming is a great idea to control people's behavior, encourage them to alter their behavior. But when you're talking about a behavior that's serving the marketplace with goods and services people want, it's going to have the opposite effect as you desire.
It might raise prices. I could see a dealer saying, well, now that I'm facing 20 plus the registry, there's a 5% risk premium included. But no, it's just a terrible idea from a guy that has no problem admitting on Facebook. This is one of the Facebook discussions, in my opinion, that should have made national news, is Jack Flanagan on Facebook talking about the fact that, I sensed that could have happened. I could have created more heroin users by passing this opioid bill.
I did it anyway.
Well, I did it anyway. So Flanagan, if you're out there, tough marbles.
But going back to the task force, I guess it would be, I have very little to no control over what comes out of the task force, but my druthers would be that they focus more on, helping the addict. But it's difficult to do if you can't force someone to want to get well. It really comes down to a community problem where when our neighbors, friends, and loved ones are having this issue, they need to be surrounded by people that care about them. That's really the crux of the issue, and it's a societal. There's an aspect of societal decay that
Yeah.
that's
And I think, along with the fact that it's very hard to help people, like with any kind of disease or problem, the prevention is far easier and far more effective than cure, right? So we need to spend a lot more time rather than figuring out how to cure people of their addictions, figuring out why they got that way in the first place.
Right.
And I think that comes down to the school systems, the other forms of child abuse in our society.
Well, I mean, again, the thing I come back to is and it kind of more reaches to what we're talking about with societal decay, so to speak, and even family values, if you will, kind of coming together as a family unit. I do see this is not an appropriate avenue for the government to try to solve the problem, because we have a history of just making it worse. I do see this as, how can we put tools in place that augment, the family unit and close friends and relatives and coming together and helping these people out. I just don't know that, it looks good in the papers, I suppose, when we say we're having a task force and it's for emergency purposes. Right. But you even talk to some of the folks in the medical profession, and they're even testifying that they don't think this is the right path to go down. I just see this as just, again, kind of more of the same, pandering to the base and making you feel like we're up there really working hard to solve everyday issues. And
it's not a palliative move, like this is a problem, now it's a crisis, we have to do something and just do more of the same,
Well, I mean, even when they get the back and forth, they talk about, the governor vetoed the budget and that had additional monies for, they all act like it was imperative for them to get those monies to those facilities. Mm-hmm. I just want to tell everybody, again, in my humble opinion, no one, governor or Republicans, whatever, no one cared at that point in time. Like, they were not thinking about those people. They're just using their grandstanding, and they're trying to use an issue. The governor's doing it too, but it's just how politics is dissolved, or devolved, I should say, into not let's talk about the issue and look at the underlying fact pattern, but like what does this side say versus this side?
Right.
And geez, I'm on Team Red, so I oppose everything Team Blue has to say, or I'm on Team Blue and I think all Reds are crazy. That's done such a disservice, I think, to government at large, because it has an issue in terms of not functioning well. And now, used to be able to say, I think before we ran for office and became reps, that kind of the talking heads and whatnot that you see on MSNBC and CNN and Fox News, that kind of had more, I think, to do with like the federal level and Congress and the Senate up there. But now you see, like, we've been in the national media, I think, 4 times so far in terms of stuff that's happened in New Hampshire.
Like this week?
Maybe. Oh. Well, I remember the red tail hawk thing with the second graders or whatever it might have been.
Well, there was Catherine Prudhomme O'Brien. Am I saying her name right?
Yes.
So I was listening to Sean Hannity yesterday, driving around, and she was on talking about what happened with the Hillary event. She explained the story. Did you hear about this?
I did.
Yeah. So
for sure.
That was national news.
Well, again, and
there's people viewing. So yeah, she called out Clinton for
because of her husband's actually like
raping,
terrible history of sexual abuse towards women, and I see people like Michael Moore, to the extreme of myself on the other side of these issues, but even he, who calls himself a champion of women's rights and women's issues, defending Bill Clinton as great for women. And I when we start to get in a situation where you just whitewash the guy that's on your team, and Republicans do this all the time too. So again, I'm an equal opportunity offender in this regard. Republicans do it for their people, but that's such a disservice to the voters at large.
Yeah,
because
it's like having a football player on your team and calling him the best player you've ever had but he actually can't play football. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
I sense that you're attacking Tom Brady.
No, I was just talking about Bill
I think he
Clinton.
was.
Okay.
No.
We can end the show right now.
Can we? I don't know. Do you want to throw in the Medicaid wrinkle to this
Well,
to this heroin
we've got 5
situation?
minutes left, so Medicaid we could go on for a while.
We could, but let's just talk about with relation to the heroin.
Well,
So
to wrap up, and to your point, what they're trying to push in terms of another resolution to the heroin crisis is we have to roll in reauthorization of Medicaid expansion, which I remind viewers at home, if you go and you actually look at these bills provide free health coverage to able-bodied, working-age citizens of New Hampshire.
Above the poverty
who choose not to work.
Who choose not, I mean, in many cases, choose not to work. I don't want to say all of them choose not to work, but this is not your typical package in terms of, oh, that person's infirmed or disabled and they can't work. These are people that do not work. Enter this program, and now we're saying because 5,000 of the 45,000 people in this program potentially use heroin, we have to authorize hundreds of millions of dollars in spending on this.
Right.
Well, and once this is in, if we don't stop this is here forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have these guys who are building these new treatment centers who want to get their hands on that Medicaid money, so they spend, just like with any industry trying to get government money, you spend your money lobbying to try to get access to that pot of gold at the end of that rainbow.
Well, again, I know Burt feels the same way. We have to fight hard to make sure that this program doesn't get reauthorized because it unfairly attacks the people that are paying $1,000, $2,000 a month for their health coverage, go to work every day, for folks that aren't, and that's not the role of government, at least in our opinion. So, anyway, with that, we're close to running out of time here. We've got a few minutes left, but. Overall, I think it was a quality show. Would have loved to have had John here, but
Well, we saw John today. He's looking pretty good.
Well, I know how important making sure he makes every vote, and I say that having not made the votes today, but at least I'm transparent. So I'm being honest with you. I did not do my duty today. I apologize.
Just a tip for you. So I missed a day of voting last year, and so what I did is I went on my Facebook page and I outlined every single vote. How I would have voted if I had been there. That way my people know my mind.
That's not a bad idea. I might actually...
it's a way of going on the record without going on the record.
I like that. So, no, I might actually do that myself. But I think, again, I come off, I think, as a little pessimistic in terms of how things operate at the State House. And there's a reason for that. It's because there's a lot to be pessimistic about. But... for folks that are out there viewing, again, we've got a couple minutes left. I do want to tell you, we've got a lot of good reps that aren't returning next year. A lot of good, really strong voting record reps that feel the same way as we do, and John Burt. If you're interested at all, and I know it's a big drain on your free time, if you have it, or if you're working, it can be very difficult, but give a thought to joining us up at the State House and giving us a hand to help get the state right back on the right track.
If you need encouragement on doing that, just give any of us a call, and we'll tell you how it's done. And
quickly,
and help
before we go, can we give some email addresses where people can catch us?
I'd like to give a plug for the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. If you're interested in running for office, contact New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and it's nhliberty.org, and that's what the organization does. Is it helps candidates run for office, and it'll put you in touch with resources. Other people that have done it before.
Okay.
And so, nhliberty.org.
A great organization. So, again, in closing, this is Bart Fromuth, Representative Jason Osborne, Representative Keith Ammon, signing off and wishing all of you in Goffstown a wonderful night and a speedy recovery to our very good friend John Burt. Thank you very much.